Her singing was accompanied by an angelic voice and the innocent grin of a girl from next door. Karen Carpenter was progressively fading away under her flawless performances and soothing melodies. Many people adored her. She was the shining core of the Carpenters, and the world stopped to listen to her calming voice. Something seemed odd, though, behind the scenes. Even her most ardent followers were in the dark about how terrible it was. Emerging from her autopsy is shocking new information. This is not the story that was told to us. Trust us. What happened to Karen Carpenter in reality? What did they fail to see, remain silent about, or maybe even try to hide? This isn't just another tragic event involving a celebrity. It's the devastating collapse of a much-loved vocalist, along with the mysteries she buried. Keep watching, because the latest revelation will make you rethink your entire understanding of Karen. Years before her career took off, Karen Carpenter was a quiet teen from Downey, California, who fell secretly in love with music. She would go on to appear on magazine covers and perform under the bright lights of stadiums. However, what started out as a light pastime would transform into something considerably more substantial, something that her own family failed to foresee. Karen and her brother didn't perform together or even on stage for the first time. 2+2 was an all-female band that she and her pals formed when she was in high school. Unfortunately, the fantasy did not last. After one of the females was denied permission to play at their first gig, the group quickly disbanded. History was written throughout their brief musical foray. The Dick Carpenter Trio, which included her brother Richard, a friend of Richard's from college, and herself, formed in 1965. Playing jazz in nightclubs, practicing every day, and tripping along the way, they weren't yet aiming for chart toppers. Karen was no longer even the lead singer at this stage. Subdued yet fervent, she played the drums. Richard continued by saying that it was as if she had grown up in a drum factory. Her natural talent for playing the drums was palpable. Despite working on 2 instrumentals with RCA Records, their efforts were ultimately in vain. There had been no announcement or fanfare, yet things were starting to shift. A small audition in April 1966 brought them an opportunity to play for Joe Osborne, a renowned bassist best known for his work with the studio band The Wrecking Crew. At first, Karen planned to only play the drums during the session, but she ended up trying to sing a few songs in. And that was the turning point. Everyone stopped what they were doing the second her voice was heard. She had a mesmerizing, unforgettable delivery that was both precise and soothing. Osborne was serious. Without delay, he had her signed to Magic Lamp Records, his record label. Curiously, he didn't even show any interest in Richard. The spotlight was really on Karen. They started to change into something else as a trio by 1967. Spectrum, a band known for its clean harmonies and less rowdy sound, was formed after they recruited other musicians including John Bettis and Gary Sims. They spent a lot of time at Osborne's garage studio making demo tapes, overdubbing voices, and playing music. However, record labels showed no interest. Clubs wanted music that was louder. Spectrum wasn't cool, and psychedelic rock was all the rage. Still, Karen kept going. In 1968, she got her big break on national television. You were jamming and singing along with your All-American College show while she danced on the street. The crowd went wild. It wasn't just a performance. Finally, they prevailed. Here is a picture of the whole family. Much more ordinary than people gave it credit for was Karen Carpenter's reality, behind the sugary sweetness and stage performances. But there were times when things were complicated, especially with her loved ones. With the expectation that Richard, Karen's older brother, would achieve great success in the music industry, the Carpenter family moved from Connecticut to Los Angeles. Things started to get tricky at that point. While everyone was staring at Richard's talent, Karen was stealthily working on her own. As I sit at the drum set, I listen carefully and try to memorize the beats. However, nobody paid any attention. Nobody, not even her folks, could. Certainly not in the outset. At the age of nearly 24, Karen continued to reside with her family. That's an incredibly long time, especially for a woman who was already becoming famous. However, her stay was not motivated by convenience. A magnetic pull was felt. Although they were quite close as a family, Karen occasionally felt stifled in her own space. Yes, it was warm, but it was heavy. Karen did not move into her own apartment until 1976. She bought out 2 flats in Century City and had them joined to create a stunning single-family home. Plus, she infused it with a gentle, individual touch, as is typical of Karen. The first notes of "We've Only Just Begun" sounded on her doorbell. Karen maintained her love for life's little pleasures despite the glamour that surrounded her. She possessed an extensive collection of Disney memorabilia and sculptures, and her store shelves were brimming with them. However, her deepest desire? Baseball is popular. She was fantastic when she was a kid and would play on the street with the guys from the neighborhood. to the point where the kids drafted her before Richard because she was so amazing. She knew the numbers and did more than just watch the game. By the early 1970s, she had become such a devoted follower of the New York Yankees that she had even pitched for a celebrity softball team. She found solace in it, more than just a hobby. Karen's personal life was far from exciting and dramatic. Rather, it was intricate, reserved, lonely at times, and tied to those who did not always see her for who she really was. No matter what everybody else thinks about her, marital problems, and their resolution, Karen Carpenter always seemed to daydream of the simple life, a calm living, a happy household, and someone to come back to when the limelight went out. But, as with so many of her dreams, it turned out differently than she had hoped. Karen didn't have much of a dating profile in her early years of working. Being on the go all the time made her say that having a relationship was next to impossible. When she said she didn't want to get married just because, she meant it. But she secretly yearned for a love that would endure. It was 1980 when she thought she had found it. Thomas James Burris was a real estate builder who was over 10 years Karen's senior when they were married. The speed of the romance, according to several of her friends, was excessive. Still, Karen fell head over heels. The lavish crystal room of the Beverly Hills Hotel was the site of the wedding on August 31st, 1980. The ceremony would even feature music from her CD, Because We Are in Love. A celebration of new beginnings was meant to take place, but then reality hit like a ton of bricks. Kids have always been Karen's dream. The fact that Burris had undergone a vasectomy was unknown to her until just before the wedding. The idea of having it turned around didn't bother him. That was dreadful for Karen. As important as having a family was, trust was more important. It seems as though something had already been broken. Regardless, she tried to salvage the situation. Even after the couple moved into their Newport Beach house, the tension remained. Burris was living extravagantly, taking out loans from Karen totaling tens of thousands of dollars. It wasn't just anxiety over finances. She seemed more anxious and fragile, according to her friends. The happiness she had anticipated never materialized. Things reached a boiling point by 1981. At a family dinner, Karen and Burris got into a heated disagreement, and then they broke up. She subtly changed her will to leave her home and goods to him, while her relatives and Richard would each receive millions of dollars. That conveyed a great deal without actually saying anything. Formally requested a divorce on October 28, 1982, while she was already receiving treatment at the hospital. She felt even more alone as a result of the ending of a chapter that had promised her solace. The unreleased album. It wasn't singing that Karen Carpenter did. It was feeling, and everyone could feel it. In contrast to the trend toward brasher, harder, and louder music in the early 1970s, the Carpenters stayed true to themselves. They became pliable. Subtle harmonies, honest lyrics, and melodies that brought a sense of home were what they bent into. Thanks to Karen, the risk paid off. She had an understated voice. Warm, clear, deep, and so accurate. No gimmicks needed. Recordings such as We've Only Just Begun, Close to You, and Rainy Days and Mondays propelled her to stardom and put millions of people at ease. Folks' tunes were listened to by folks who were grieving, on the verge of falling in love, or just trying to hold on to something that was moving at a breakneck pace. However, Karen was secretly changing and yearning for more. Karen began to feel confined despite her brother Richard's supervision of the sequencing and guidance of most creative decisions. With each record, she sung flawlessly, but her emotional investment in the songs grew progressively weaker. Something raw and intimate was what she craved, one that sounded more like her than the Carpenters. She did so in 1979. Karen fled to New York and began discreetly recording a solo album away from her brother, the creative team at the label, and their distinctively soft pop sound. She chose tracks that would resonate with a modern, adult Karen while collaborating with legendary producer Phil Ramone. Some of the songs were funkier, some were cleaner, and some were sexier still. It had nothing to do with satisfying consumers. Reclaiming her voice was the central theme. She personally covered the cost of the sessions. Evenings spent in the studio were a struggle for her. She felt a sense of pride once everything was finished. The room went silent, though, when she played it for her inner circle and A&M Records. Not much impressed Richard. The label's upper management was no different. Since it didn't sound like her, they thought it was a poor business decision. Shelved it went. Devastated was Cavern. The topic at hand was not music. At this same moment, she had stood up and said, "This is me." Even the people she trusted the most advised her to return to her seat. Following that, she refrained from trying again. She returned to California, grinned for the cameras, and kept on singing her old hits, but something was missing from her. She kept the solo album in a vault for over a decade because it was never released while she was alive. It wasn't given to the public until 1996, 13 years after her death. The listeners quickly recognized that this wasn't the sweet, mild-mannered Karen they had grown to know and love. Karen as she truly existed, honest, courageous, and unflappable. Even though it had its flaws, the record belonged to her. And for the majority of her admirers, it was like listening to her spirit speak unfiltered, even though it came too late. What gives everything that sorrowful vibe? It was her right. Though it may have changed everything, nobody heard that album when it was crucial, when she was overwhelmed by her difficulties. The pressure mounted as Karen Carpenter's fame grew, and it finally broke her. Karen hardly felt that she was living her life on her own because her mother Agnes was always watching over her. Rest, like everything else, became an exaggeration. From her usual 4 to 6 hours of sleep each night, she began getting as much as 16. I was assumed to be dead by my mother. After years of running on pure anxious energy, Karen admitted that what she felt was more than just exhaustion. Leave me alone. Was unable to mend the shattered pieces inside of her. Over the following 5 years, I silently battled the then little understood eating disorders of anorexia and bulimia. On social media, there were zero awareness campaigns, zero support groups, and zero places to talk about body image. Nobody around her got it. For everyone else, she remained a superstar. She was dissolving into thin air in her universe. She had attempted to record a solo album in 1980 in New York, but it was a failure. She wanted to create a sound that was uniquely hers. However, Richard and those close to her were among those who fought against it. The record company held off on releasing it. She was now censored despite her enormous popularity. She was crushed by the rejection. A brief romance with Tom Burris followed. At first glance, he seemed to be the ideal partner for Karen. But there was another tale behind the expensive suits and cars. Friends were concerned when Burris rushed the wedding and surprised her with the knowledge that he had been circumcised without telling her, which would have a profound impact on her life. This was more than just shocking. It was a betrayal of Karen's trust. She had always wanted to start a family. Karen sought solace from her mother, but she was unconvinced. Despite her pain and confusion, she was told to go ahead with the wedding. Karen had become an afterthought at the wedding. Image, media, and public opinion were at the heart of the matter. Even after they tied the knot, the Fisher family continued to expand. Burris began withdrawing enormous sums of money. With her mental and physical health already in shambles, Karen watched her savings shrink away. Karen, smiling the whole time, kept working, acting, but in reality she was exhausted, deceived, and battling an uphill battle to meet unrealistic expectations. It seemed like nobody noticed until it was too late. Was it too late for her to seek assistance now? Karen Carpenter did something no one expected after vanishing for years. For assistance, she looked for the internet. It was complicated. For most of her adult life, she had ignored her concerns, avoiding the problem, masking my pain with a smile, and acting as though nothing was wrong. At last, though, not even Karen could deny the dramatic escalation of events. It was all too much, the vertigo, the weariness, the unsettling reflection in the mirror. In 1982, she shocked everyone around her with a move. In New York, she enrolled at Lenox Hill Hospital. No, this was not an advertising ploy. It was camera-free. Karen is trying to recover without any interviews or press announcements. When she arrived at Lenox Hill, she was finally seen by experts in her field. In those days, the term anorexia or bulimia was mostly unknown. Intravenous feeding, therapy sessions, and closely supervised dietary programs were all part of her treatment. Surrendering control over her food and drink was terrifying for a lady who had spent a lifetime obsessively controlling her intake and output, but with each visit, she felt a shift. Both her appearance and her voice began to change, and her friends began to notice. Her laughter escalated. She mentioned going back to the recording studio. She made phone calls, made notepad notes, and even made plans to see long-lost pals. A feeling of lightness washed over. After what seemed like an endless wait, Karen felt hopeful again. On a physical level, she was putting on weight again, slowly but surely. However, her exhausted physique was unable to keep up. Her heart was less robust. The muscles in her body have atrophy. Organs in her body were under stress. The damage couldn't be repaired overnight, and she had been operating on fumes for far too many years. But she still thought she was making progress. In November of 1982, she escaped Lenox Hill and returned to a gloomy California. In an effort to start over, she briefly relocated back in with her parents. More time, more music, and a second chance at happiness would be perfect for her. And there was a brief instant when it appeared as though it may really occur. But healing isn't always a bed of roses. On sometimes, not all wounds are visible. "I want to live" was Karen's last statement. She had no idea her body had already decided. The day complete silence fell. On February 4, 1983, Something changed in the globe, but very few people noticed it at the time. In the Downey, California, home of the Carpenter, it started off like any other morning. Karen moved back in with her parents a few months ago. She was finally starting to feel like herself again after a lengthy battle with health concerns, heartbreak, and public silence. She was adamant about informing everyone that this was the case. She had resumed discussing music with Richard and had begun creating songs and making plans. "Look at me. I've got an ass," she had joked to herself a few days previously when gazing into the mirror. There was optimism in that brief, innocent, humorous, and human moment that she hadn't experienced in years. The day was the last day for Karen to sign the divorce papers. A fresh beginning, a leap ahead, and her joy knew no bounds. Last December, she had already visited her brother, made fresh arrangements, and serenaded her godchildren with Christmas songs. Everyone thought she was making a triumphant return. And her physical form? It had different plans. Upon awakening that morning, she entered her bedroom's closet. Not far from her bed, just a few feet away. The exact sequence of events leading up to her fall is a mystery to everyone. Unexpectedly, her heart halted. She was found asleep on the floor, and her parents were terrified. Someone dialed 911. Responders from the emergency medical services were quickly dispatched to the residence. Karen was found to be in cardiac arrest when help arrived. A pitiful 6 beats per minute was her pulse rate. Every possible effort was made by the rescue squad. She was sent directly to her hometown hospital, Downey Community Hospital, where she had grown up. However, the unfathomable happened at 9:51 in the morning. Deeds were filed in Karen Carpenter's name. At 32 years old, she was young. At first, it had a low profile. So far, there have been no breaking news tickers or startling headlines. Silence fell upon a select few loved ones and friends. Just when you thought someone was finally ready to live, they vanish. The news startled her brother Richard. The news sent her parents into a state of cold shock, especially her mother Agnes. Even they hadn't anticipated this manner of Karen's deterioration, which they had witnessed for years. Not at this time, not when conditions were better. It was hours later when they were informed of the news. Even when they were, they still didn't buy it. The person in question is Karen Carpenter. Bedrooms, radios, car journeys, and emotions were all filled with the voice that had passed away. The experience was surreal. Her lyrics had previously dealt with themes of longing, loneliness, and heartbreak. Nevertheless, her absence now overshadowed them all. On rainy days and Mondays, her songs took on a new meaning. Sending love adieu. You are essential to my survival. It seemed as if someone had foreshadowed it, and nobody had noticed in time. The death of a pop star was just the tip of the iceberg. This was the end for a woman who had tried so hard to get well, who had smiled for the cameras as she was passing out on stage, who had normalized vulnerability among female musicians, who had handled the pressures of fame, family expectations, and personal suffering with grace and strength. Tragically, her heart gave out on her right as she was finally ready to live. On that fateful day, no famous person went missing, got lost an invaluable member of its staff. The truth of what had transpired to her remained unknown, though. That information would remain hidden until the autopsy report became public knowledge. It changed the game when it happened. The results of the autopsy were disclosed. Everyone felt like they lost out on something great when word got out about Karen Carpenter's tragic death. Her adoring public was perplexed and angry. How did someone so young and talented just vanish into thin air? Whispers concerning her weight, appearance, and exhaustion had been circulating about, but no one had a clue as to what lay beyond that flawless smile. Next came the post-mortem examination. The word anorexia nervosa was completely foreign to the majority of them. Los Angeles County Coroner's Office reports that imitine cardiotoxicity as a result of anorexia nervosa was the official cause of death. Her heart had just given out from the horrible malnutrition she had endured for so many years. She had already suffered serious health consequences by the time she sought medical attention. She weighed just 108 pounds when she passed away. That might not have raised warning signals on its own, but that wasn't where the danger lay. What was discovered in the post-mortem examination was even more disturbing. Her heart was as tiny as a baby's. She was physically weak and susceptible to injury because of her long history of bad behaviors and stress. They had tried to save her, her doctors. She began receiving intravenous nutrition months ago after being admitted to New York's Lenox Hill Hospital, where she quickly put on weight. For many, her rapid weight gain of 30 pounds in only a few weeks was cause for celebration. However, the healing process itself was too much for her already frail heart to bear. Karen allegedly engaged in questionable practices behind the scenes to manage her weight, decisions that could have caused harm to one's health in the long run. The effects of her past actions, according to specialists, were irreversible, even if no drugs were discovered when she passed away. The findings roused an entire generation. They were more than just medical. People rarely brought up the topic of eating disorders until Karen's death. Their exact nature was unknown to most. Until her death, anorexia was not even acknowledged as a serious mental condition by the majority of psychiatrists. It was like no one had ever noticed before. The news reports weren't just asking what transpired. How could we have failed to see this? They wanted to know. Not only did her autopsy detail her death, but it also detailed the ordeal she had silently undergone for nearly a decade. The world began to wonder what it meant for a woman to be in the spotlight, to be slender, flawless,